The Senate hearing room was so quiet that even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed loud. Jasmine Crockett walked toward the microphone, her emerald green blazer vivid against the chamber's paneled mahogany walls. Every step was deliberate. The C-SPAN cameras followed her with sharp focus, while Senator Marco Rubio shuffled his stack of papers at the dais, barely glancing up. His expression carried that familiar mix of impatience and superiority. What unfolded next would stun everyone in that room and millions watching from home. Rubio had spent the entire morning cutting off Democratic lawmakers mid-sentence, his interruptions sharp and frequent. But when he turned that same tactic on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, he miscalculated. By the sixth interruption, the air in the room felt thick with frustration. Democratic senators exchanged uneasy glances while their Republican counterparts smirked in quiet amusement. But what no one expected was what happened next. 9 words that flipped the balance of power in the room and left Rubio speechless. Veteran reporters later described it as the most devastating parliamentary takedown in recent memory. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a moment that revealed exactly why Jasmine Crockett had become one of the most feared and respected voices in Washington. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on judicial nominations had been tense from the start. Chairman Marco Rubio, the 53-year-old Republican senator from Florida, had opened the session with his usual practiced authority. A former presidential hopeful still harboring ambitions, Rubio had mastered the art of turning hearings into viral political theater. He leaned into the microphone with the same polished tone he used on the campaign trail. "We're going to maintain order today," he declared. "And we're going to deal in facts, not political performances." To the Democrats on the panel, the irony was thick. Rubio had long perfected the art of performance disguised as procedure. Sitting across from him was Representative Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old Democrat from Texas, known for her sharp intellect, composed demeanor, and unmatched courtroom experience. Before entering politics, she'd built her reputation as a civil rights attorney who thrived under pressure. In hearings, she wielded facts the way trial lawyers use cross-examination, surgically, methodically, decisively. Today's stakes were unusually high. President Harris had nominated Judge Eleanor Ramirez to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Her confirmation would be historic. The first Latina judge on a court dominated for decades by conservatives. The nomination had already sparked fierce debate. Republicans framed Ramirez as an activist judge, despite her record showing consistent moderation. For Democrats, her confirmation was crucial, a symbolic and strategic victory before the upcoming midterms. Crockett was chosen as the party's point person. Her legal background made her the ideal defender for a nominee under political siege. Backstage before the hearing, Senator Amy Klobuchar had quietly warned her. "Rubio's been interrupting everyone lately. Don't take the bait." Crockett smiled faintly. "I've dealt with worse than Marco Rubio back home in Texas courtrooms." As the hearing began, the cameras captured every movement. Rubio presided like a conductor orchestrating conflict. He called the session to order, his gavel striking twice. "We'll begin with opening remarks from our guest member from the House, Representative Jasmine Crockett." Crockett approached the microphone. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began. "I'd like to speak to Judge Ramirez's record on—" Rubio didn't wait. "Before you proceed, Congresswoman," he interjected sharply, "let's remember time limits apply to everyone. No exceptions." His tone dripped with condescension. Several Republican senators chuckled under their breath. Crockett didn't flinch. She took a slow breath and continued, her tone unshaken. "As I was saying, Mr. Chairman, Judge Ramirez's record on civil rights demonstrates—" "Congresswoman," Rubio interrupted again, louder this time. "We're here to discuss judicial philosophy, not campaign speeches." Crockett blinked once, then gave the briefest look of disbelief. 2 interruptions already. Before she'd completed a single point. The dismissive tone was clear. Across the dais, Senator Dick Durbin leaned toward his microphone. "Mr. Chairman, if I may, the Congresswoman has barely spoken 10 words. Perhaps she could finish a sentence before we begin policing her remarks." Rubio waved a hand dismissively. "She has 5 minutes, Senator." "The clock is running," Crockett nodded. Her tone sharpened slightly. "Judge Ramirez has presided over 437 cases, with 92% upheld by higher courts, which demonstrates those statistics are misleading." Rubio cut in for the third time. "Many were routine cases. Let's not cherry-pick numbers to make a weak nominee look strong." Senator Elizabeth Warren scribbled something furiously on her notepad, her jaw tight. Cameras zoomed in on Crockett's calm, disciplined face. "Mr. Chairman," she replied, "those figures represent the full record. I'd be happy to submit them." "We've all read her record," Rubio interrupted again, his fourth time, "and many of us find it troubling. Your attempts to whitewash her activism won't work here." The Democratic side erupted in murmurs of protest. Senator Cory Booker raised his hand, but Rubio ignored him. Social media was already exploding with live clips, users commenting that Rubio hadn't let Crockett complete a single sentence. Crockett steadied herself. "Let me address that criticism directly. In Texas versus Harmon, which you've cited," Rubio interrupted for the fifth time, smirking. "We don't need you to read case opinions, Congresswoman. Ask a question or yield your time." That word, performance, lingered. The dismissal was sharp, the subtext unmistakable. Crockett placed her hands flat on the desk, a centering gesture she'd used countless times in trial. When she spoke, her voice carried an icy calm. "Mr. Chairman," she began, "you may disagree with Judge Ramirez's philosophy, but her qualifications aren't in dispute. Top of her class at Columbia, clerked for Chief Justice Roberts, highest rating from the American Bar Association. Those aren't partisan talking points. They're facts." Rubio leaned back, checking his watch theatrically. 3 minutes gone, Congresswoman. Still no questions. Time is slipping." Something shifted in Crockett's demeanor, subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened. Her tone hardened. Everyone familiar with her courtroom style recognized the change instantly. This was Jasmine Crockett in full command. "Mr. Chairman," she said evenly, "I have been interrupted 6 times while attempting to establish factual background. Committee Rules, Section 7, Paragraph 2, which you voted to adopt, guarantee uninterrupted questioning time. Would you like me to read it for the record?" The room froze. Rubio blinked, momentarily thrown off. The silence stretched. Crockett continued, her tone razor-sharp. "As I was saying before being interrupted repeatedly, Judge Ramirez's record demonstrates adherence to precedent regardless of her personal beliefs. That's judicial restraint. Yet when a Latina judge exhibits it, suddenly it's called activism." Rubio reached for his microphone again, jaw tight. The cameras zoomed in on both faces, his irritation, her composure. "Congresswoman, your implication of bias is—" "Mr. Chairman," Crockett interrupted this time, her voice ringing clear and controlled, "is my time controlled by the clock or by your interruptions?" 9 words. The perfect question. The chamber gasped audibly. The impact was instant, sharp, direct, undeniable. Klobuchar suppressed a smile. Even Judge Ramirez, normally impassive, raised an eyebrow. It wasn't anger. It was surgical precision. Crockett hadn't insulted him. She had exposed him, using the very rules he claimed to uphold. For several seconds, Rubio said nothing, his face drained of confidence. He looked down, shuffled his papers. "The clock controls everyone's time, Congresswoman," he finally muttered. "Then I'll continue without further interruption for my remaining 2 minutes and 17 seconds, Crockett replied, glancing at the timer. What followed was a masterclass in controlled advocacy. Crockett laid out Ramirez's record case by case, systematically dismantling every Republican talking point. She cited written opinions, referenced conservative judges who had made identical rulings, and presented a simple chart comparing judicial consistency across 5 circuit judges. Ramirez's record, highlighted in yellow, was indistinguishable from her conservative counterparts. Rubio sat motionless. The smirk was gone. The balance of power in the room had flipped. For the first time all day, he didn't interrupt. "As my time concludes," Crockett said, "let's address this label of activist judge. Judge Ramirez's reversal rate is lower than all but 2 sitting Fifth Circuit judges. If consistency and adherence to precedent are activism, perhaps we need to redefine the word. She turned to Judge Ramirez. Judge, after being labeled everything from radical to unqualified, how do you remain focused on your work? Ramirez replied calmly. Congresswoman, I focus on the law as written, not on politics or labels. My record speaks for itself. When Crockett's time expired, the transformation in the room was complete. Democratic senators were upright, energized. Republicans looked unsettled. Rubio didn't reach for his microphone again. Senator Durbin leaned forward. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett, for that extraordinary line of questioning. The word extraordinary echoed through the chamber, a subtle acknowledgement of what had just happened. The freshman congresswoman had turned a public hearing into a moment of political history. When the committee recessed for lunch, the hearing room erupted into a storm of whispers. Reporters hurried toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears, dictating the headline they all knew would dominate the next news cycle. Clips of Crockett's question. Is my time controlled by the clock or by your interruptions? Were already circulating across social media before she even left the dais. By the time she reached the hallway, the video had gone viral. Inside the chamber, Democratic senators surrounded her, shaking hands, congratulating her. Senator Warren leaned in and murmured, "That's how you handle a bully." Senator Booker just smiled, shaking his head with admiration. Across the aisle, the mood was very different. Rubio sat stiffly at the chairman's seat, flipping through papers that no longer mattered. His aides approached hesitantly, whispering, but he waved them off. The man who had spent the morning controlling the hearing through interruptions now looked cornered. Silenced not by force, but by precision. In the corridors outside, journalists waited. Congresswoman Crockett, do you have a moment? One called out. She paused briefly, her composure unchanged. The rules exist for everyone, she said simply. I just ask that they apply equally. Then she turned and disappeared into a side hallway, leaving the cameras scrambling for reaction shots. By early afternoon, the moment had consumed Washington. On Twitter, Crockett shut down and is controlled trended nationwide. Cable networks ran the clip on loop. The freeze frame of Rubio's stunned expression became instant political iconography. On CNN, a political analyst called it the single most devastating procedural counterpunch we've seen in years. MSNBC's evening segment described it as a rare moment when facts, composure, and rules aligned perfectly to expose bias in real time. Fox News took a different approach. One commentator defended Rubio, claiming he was merely trying to maintain order. Crockett's remark might make for a viral clip, he said, but it undermines the decorum of congressional hearings. Yet even on conservative networks, the image of Rubio silenced mid-interruption spoke louder than the commentary trying to contain it. That night, every major political program opened with the same footage. On Anderson Cooper 360, the host noted, "This wasn't about gender or party. It was about control. When a chairman uses interruptions to dominate, he risks exposing that control for what it is." The Washington Post released an evening edition editorial titled, When Procedure Becomes Power, Crockett versus Rubio. It argued that the moment had crystallized a broader issue. The persistent pattern of male politicians interrupting female colleagues during public proceedings. Inside the White House, the president's staff watched the clip during their afternoon briefing. When reporters asked for comment later that day, Press Secretary James Reynolds responded carefully. The president was impressed by Congresswoman Crockett's professionalism and command of the facts, he said. Every member deserves their full time to speak, regardless of gender or party affiliation. Behind the scenes, the exchange had already shifted the political landscape. 3 moderate Republican senators who had been wavering on Judge Ramirez's nomination quietly reached out to schedule private meetings with her. Senator Lisa Murkowski was overheard telling a colleague, if the only way they can defend their argument is by silencing her supporters, maybe their case isn't as strong as they claim. By the next morning, the consequences were rippling outward. Rubio's communications team spent hours drafting talking points, but every attempt to reframe the narrative only fueled more attention. Donors began calling his office, some expressing unease about how the exchange had played out. One longtime contributor reportedly said, "He looked like he lost control, and that's not what leadership looks like." Meanwhile, Crockett's office phone lines were overwhelmed. Requests for interviews poured in from every major outlet. Overnight, her social media following tripled. Small-dollar donations flooded her campaign site, many accompanied by notes reading, "For those 9 words." She appeared on Morning Joe 2 days later, calm as ever. "It wasn't about confrontation," she said. "It was about respect. Respect for rules, respect for time, and respect for voices that too often get dismissed." Within a week, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance Judge Ramirez's nomination to the full Senate. The vote was closer than expected, 11-10. But what shocked Washington was that 2 Republican senators, Murkowski and Collins, broke ranks to support her. Neither cited the hearing directly, but political observers knew the timing wasn't coincidence. The confrontation had changed the tone of the entire process. As the confirmation moved toward a full Senate vote, media outlets continued to dissect the exchange. The New York Times featured a Sunday analysis titled 9 Words That Shook the Senate. It described Crockett's moment as a masterclass in the power of brevity. Otne, one that turned parliamentary. Procedure into moral clarity. Late night shows joined in too. The Daily Show aired a supercut of Rubio interrupting women over the years, ending with Crockett's viral line. Even Saturday Night Live teased a sketch based on the hearing, with the punchline being a chairman trying and failing to reclaim his authority. Inside the Republican cloakroom, the atmosphere was tense. Rubio's colleagues were frustrated, not just with his behavior but with its fallout. He gave them the clip they needed, one GOP senator admitted to Politico. "Now it looks like we're silencing women rather than debating policy." For a man rumored to be preparing another presidential run, it was a serious setback. Judge Ramirez, meanwhile, stayed above the fray. She refused to comment on the hearing, focusing instead on her judicial responsibilities. Her silence only reinforced the impression of calm competence, exactly the image her supporters wanted. Editorial boards began shifting their tone, describing her as measured, impartial, and impeccably qualified. When the full Senate finally voted 2 weeks later, the results were historic, 52-48. Judge Eleanor Ramirez became the first Latina to serve on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Her confirmation was hailed as a victory not only for representation, but for fairness. And much of that credit quietly traced back to one question, asked at the right time, by the right person. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment transformed her career overnight. Political strategists began discussing her as a rising national figure, someone who combined intellect, discipline, and authenticity in a way rarely seen in modern politics. Talk shows invited her to discuss gender equity in government. Magazines featured her as a symbol of composure under pressure. Within a month, her approval ratings in Texas had climbed 10 points, and fundraising numbers shattered previous records. But Crockett herself remained grounded. When asked later about the viral moment, she said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about setting a standard. If we can't even let each other speak, how can we claim to govern?" 6 months later, the Senate quietly adopted a new procedural rule. Time lost to interruptions would be credited back to the member interrupted. Several other committees followed suit, citing the Crockett incident as precedent. Behind the scenes, media consultants began training female lawmakers using the clip as a case study. How to reclaim authority without raising one's voice. It became known in political circles simply as the Crockett technique. Even Rubio changed. In subsequent hearings, his tone softened, his interruptions fewer. Whether out of reflection or damage control, it was clear he had learned from the fallout. He never publicly addressed the incident, though aides privately acknowledged it had redefined his public image in ways that would take years to repair. A year after the hearing, Crockett published an op-ed in the New York Times titled "Beyond Interruption: Restoring Substance to American Politics." That question, she wrote, wasn't about ego or spectacle. It was about structure, about ensuring that our institutions reflect fairness, not dominance. When debate becomes a contest of interruptions rather than ideas, democracy itself is diminished. The essay was widely praised across party lines for its maturity and focus on principle over partisanship. It was reprinted in dozens of newspapers and discussed on academic panels about gender dynamics in governance. Not long after, the Pew Research Center released a study confirming what the moment had already exposed. Female lawmakers, the report found, were interrupted nearly 3 times as often as their male counterparts during committee proceedings. The study cited the Crockett-Rubio exchange as the turning point that brought national attention to the issue. For Judge Ramirez, the entire controversy faded into the background of an exemplary judicial career. Her early opinions on the Fifth Circuit reflected the moderation and intellectual rigor Crockett had defended. Her rulings were praised for clarity and adherence to precedent, proof that her critics' warnings of activism were unfounded. As for the relationship between Crockett and Rubio, they maintained a professional distance. They greeted each other politely in hallways, exchanged brief nods during bipartisan events, but never revisited that day. Staffers from both offices noted an unspoken respect and a quiet awareness that neither would underestimate the other again. In Washington's collective memory, the moment became shorthand for a rare kind of mastery. It was quoted in political science classes, studied by communication strategists, and referenced in leadership workshops. 9 words, people said, that changed the tone of an entire institution. What had begun as a routine attempt to silence a junior member had turned into a defining moment of accountability. Crockett hadn't shouted, insulted, or dramatized. She had simply used the system's own rules to reveal its imbalance. That clarity resonated far beyond the walls of the Senate hearing room. Months later, a journalist asked her what she thought about the viral fame that followed. She smiled slightly and said, "If the only thing people remember about me is that I asked for fairness, I can live with that." Her words lingered, understated, but powerful, the kind that don't fade when the cameras stop rolling. And so, in the annals of congressional history, the exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Marco Rubio became more than just a viral clip. It became a reminder that in the right hands, a few carefully chosen words can reset the balance of power, restore the rules of fairness, and, for a fleeting but unforgettable moment, remind Washington what real leadership looks like.